Hello, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Leadership and Strategic Management. I am Bill, the company's expert. Thank you for joining me today. This is episode number 24 of Leadership and Strategic Management, everybody's favorite live stream. This is the weekly live stream where we talk about higher level business type topics. So it's not about job search, really, at least not the lower level stuff. It's not about entrepreneurship. It's more about higher level stuff. And the topic today is how to get hired in management roles. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. As always, a shout out goes out to my YouTube channel members. You guys are awesome. And also my Patreons. You guys are awesome too. And people who send in super chats. So super chat donors, you guys are awesome as well. And finally, to my viewers and participants, that means you. You're awesome too. Thank you for being here. This is primarily a Q&A. I mean, I've got a bit of a spiel to go through at the beginning, but if you have been a subscriber to my channel for any amount of time, you should see a chat box somewhere near my face, depending on what device you're watching this on, and get in the chat and let me know what you think about the whole thing. You know, what's your appraisal of the state of affairs when it comes to our topic today, or just life, the universe, and everything. I suppose we could get into that, but we are going to dive right into how to get hired in management. I keep wanting to say strategic management roles. How to get hired in management roles. On this channel, we talk about how to get a job. Okay, that's usually worker level stuff, right? Could apply to, you know, entry level management, frontline management, like supervisors, that kind of stuff. But here we're talking about the higher level stuff intentionally. So without any further ado, let's dive right in. We got 17 people here. Thank you for being here. Okay, so if you want to improve yourself or realize your ambition, and you also coincidentally want to make more money, and you want to do it in within the confines of a corporate career, okay, then this is something that's going to be of interest to you. Getting hired in a leadership role, often it's not what people think it is. The role itself is not what people think it is, and how to get those opportunities is also not what people think it is, usually. At least when you're a worker standing there looking up, right? That's kind of the deal. I'm going to divide this into two parts. The first, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a blurb of a couple of, just an overview of what I think it's about, what I've seen in my experience. And then, as an added bonus, what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up ChatGPT. I'm going to ask it this question, and I'm going to react to what it says, rightly or wrongly, and we'll go from there. So, okay, so leadership roles or management roles, hopefully everybody knows what that is. You are managing something. Managers are people that do four things, right? Okay, the four management functions. So they plan, they influence, they organize, and they control. Those are the four kind of things, right? So those kind of roles, and you make decisions. You're not simply following instructions, you're determining the instructions, right? That's essentially the management role. Okay, now you can measure that in terms of your, do you manage people, right? Because that's definitely a thing. Some managers, they manage people. They have direct reports, right? Other people, other managers, they don't manage people. They might manage projects, right? And a lot of times that can include a lack of people, or you could manage things like assets. So they put you in charge of a building, or they put you in charge of a fund, or, something like this, right? So there's different types of management, but basically the role is the same. Now, there's many ways of doing this, of being put into a management type position. Like, for example, maybe your daddy's rich. That does happen occasionally, and so people get catapulted into these roles, usually before they're ready, but not always. Sometimes they've been around and had an exposure to that stuff, so that gives them an edge, right? But there's many ways of doing it. I'm going to give you sort of my method, what I'd recommend in a general sense. Okay, so getting hired in leadership roles, for me, a big component of it is networking, okay? These roles, because you are making decisions and you are determining what needs to be done, as opposed to the worker level where you're told what needs to be done and you have to do it. Because you're determining what needs to be done, you're making decisions. Often people don't realize that those roles are really about trust. Do they trust that you have good judgment, right? What would it take for you to hire somebody and put them in charge of your stuff while you're on vacation or something? Like your home. You got an apartment, you got a house, whatever you have. What would it take for you to feel comfortable to put someone in charge of that while you're gone? Because for a lot of businesses, that's kind of the situation, right? And when you put it in those terms, you quickly realize it's not so much about like raw qualifications as it is about how much you trust that person, right? One person could be like the most accomplished person in the world on paper. They might have all these fancy educational qualifications. They might have all this fancy experience, but if they're a stranger to you, or you suspect that maybe they're out for themselves and they're not really looking after your best interests, you're not going to put them in charge, right? So it's about trust. How can we build trust so that someone will consider us to be in a management type role or a leadership type role? I'm talking here about management. Management is broader than just leadership. Leadership is one of the 4 management functions. It's the influencing function. So that's part of what managers do, but management is a broader thing, right? So that's what we're talking about here. So you could be like a chief accountant or something. You could be running like a service operation, right? You could be in charge of a piece of a manufacturing company. So maybe you operate certain machines or you supervise the people that operate the machines, that kind of thing, right? So all of those are management positions. So the first thing, like I said, is networking. Networking. In order for people to trust you, you can't be a stranger to them. And usually that means that, the method of getting a job via the posted job market is kind of out, because by definition, if you are getting a job that way, you are a stranger to these people, right? So most real management positions require trust. They need to trust your judgment. They need to trust that you're going to make the right decisions and do the right thing when their back is turned, right? That's essentially what the role is. You can't be a stranger. They have to know you. They have to know of you at the very least. And so that means, you have to have some connection with these people. That's why for management roles, they strongly favor internal candidates, because these are people that they've worked with for years. These are people that, they've observed for a long amount of time. They know that this person understands how they want things done, and they're capable of doing it, right? That's the advantage they have. Doesn't mean that you have to be an internal candidate to get a management position. We see that all the time, but it means that they do have to trust you, right? So for example, maybe you were working for their competitor for many years, and now you're wanting to get a management role in this company. You've been with their competitor for 15 years. They know of you. They also have seen how the competitor is doing a really good job. So the fact that you were maybe part of that operation, or you were in charge of that operation, that speaks volumes to your ability and your good judgment when it comes to this type of situation, right? So, usually if that's where you're coming from, they might not have worked with you directly, but they don't really have any major concerns when it comes to, will you have good judgment? Will you do things the way we would want things done? And if we're admiring your performance from afar, that probably answers yes to that one, right? So that's a big part of it. So networking in the sense that, you're essentially publicizing yourself. You're saying, hey, here I am. Let's get together. Let's talk, get to know each other, that kind of stuff. That really helps, right? It tends to amplify trust. I know who you are. I know that we get along. And I know that in the conversations we've had, you know your stuff. You have a lot of similar opinions to me. You're fine, decent person from what I can tell. We share a lot of the same attitudes towards how things should be done. So that makes me want to trust you. I would rather pick you, all things being equal, than a total stranger off the street, right? I have no idea, what's up with them. They could be crazy for all I know. I don't know them, but I do know you. I've met you many times. We've had a lot of discussions. I've heard your opinions on things. I've seen you interact with other people. So that's a real advantage. Okay, so that's the advantage of networking. Publicizing yourself, being visible. Excuse me. Being visible online, being visible at industry events. This is also something that will work in your favor. Okay, it's almost like transitioning you to a public figure in like a very limited way. Within that industry, in this location, this city or something, you're known. You're known outside of the people you immediately work with, right? So that helps too. That can get you noticed, get you on the map. And then the idea is that if they're looking for someone to fill a role, and you put your name in the hat, they're like, okay, I know them, right? And that really counts in your favor. Okay, some of the tools we have within this is just asking to have lunch with people. Things like that's a very common thing. People will not want to go for a dinner. That's kind of protocol, how these things work. They don't go have a meal with someone they don't know, but they can grab a coffee. So if you're just introducing yourself, that would be the way to do it. If you know the person, then, say, let's grab lunch together. That, is reasonable if they know you, that kind of thing. So that can be a very useful tool, right? You can compare notes. Like I'm just looking at my notes here. You can compare notes. This can be awkward if you're a direct competitor, right? So usually it's better if, you're doing this with a mutual player in the same industry, maybe like a supplier or a contractor or an institutional customer or something like that. Okay. The other thing is that, to do this, if you're trying to do it internally, it requires an affinity between you and your boss. Okay. So if you're doing the simplest possible thing, which is just sort of moving one level up in the place where you work, maybe you're moving from a worker to a frontline manager, or you're moving from like a lower management position to a mid-level management position, something like that. You getting along with your immediate boss is pretty damn important. It's very hard to move up when already you have issues with the person immediately above you, because one major part of being in management is that you have to be able to interact with a lot of different people. You have to be able to interact with people above you, do it professionally, do it productively, even if you kind of, don't click with them on a personality level or any other level. You have different skills. They're an accountant, you're a salesperson, whatever, right? You still have to be able to interoperate with them. You can't let those kind of differences get in the way. You also have to interact with people below you, and do it effectively, right? Not piss everybody off and reduce the morale to the point where everybody wants to leave, right? This kind of stuff. So there's a lot of communication involved, right, with everyone around you. So being able to get along with your boss is a critical part of this. If you can't do that, that's kind of a red flag. Unfortunately, that's how it's perceived. It's a red flag that, we shouldn't move you up. Because if you can't even get along with your boss now at this level, once you're up here, it suggests that you're not going to be able to get along with your boss in that position, and then people at that level, your peers, and then people below you, right? So that's like a real red flag. And it doesn't matter. Nobody cares about how talented you are if you just can't work with people. You know what I'm saying? For these organizations to work, people have to work together. Now, I know that we have a hell of a lot of dysfunctional organizations out there. I'm sure you've been in a few and seen that with your own eyes, but that's a theory, right? And that's what people want. So, okay, so maybe this is sad but true. You can't be antisocial. This might be a bit of a challenge for a lot of introverts out there. Introverts can be awesome at, interpersonal communication. They can be awesome at public speaking. They can be awesome at, collaboration. especially when they're dealing with people like themselves, other introverts. If you're a technician, you probably get along really well with your boss who's also a technician, right? You know what I'm saying? And then those people can move upward, right? Where they have weaknesses is if they're having to now deal with the sales department directly, there might be a bit of friction there because different personalities, different backgrounds, different perspectives. So one of the things is that they want someone that's going to be able to interoperate with every type of person and every type of background. So if you can't even get along with the people that you've been exposed to, that's a big red flag. It trumps your abilities. It trumps your qualifications. That's generally how it works. Okay, that's the end of kind of the first part of this, first part of 2. We're going to go to ChatGPT and bounce some ideas off it, and I'm going to react to them. But first, I'm going to look at, we got at least one question here. Mickey9 says, hello, Bill. How have you been? I've been doing pretty well, actually. I remember your name, Mickey9, probably from before the holidays, I'm assuming. I hope you had good holidays. I miss coming to your live stream. Until this summer, I will have been in the time zone where day and night are opposite from you. See you again soon. Take care. Okay, well, thanks for dropping by, Mickey9. I appreciate the show of support there. I hope you're doing fine, and I hope you're continuing to prosper. And if you do have any questions about stuff, come on back and come back in the middle of the night and ask a question. If you can't get to sleep at 3 a.m. and you got work the next day, come join one of my streams and ask me something really technical, and I guarantee you'll drop right off. Elisa Recto says, what do companies which do background security checks on people they want to hire? If they are a bad company, what do they say about the employee? Well, that's kind of outside the scope of what we're talking about today. We're talking about how to get management positions and stuff. That's more of a worker thing. And the short answer to that is that it varies by region, and it also varies by organization. There isn't one answer that fits that. Some people do practically nothing. Other people do go to great lengths to check you out. So that's the deal. Okay, so let's do the thing I said we were going to do. Okay, we are going to do this. I thought it might be interesting and fun today to react to this thing when it comes to this topic. So, okay, so how does one get a job in management? How does one move into those type of roles? Let's see what this thing says, and then we're going to react. Why make notes when you can just do this? I think that a lot of people might find this a bit more entertaining. Okay, so let's see. It's one that great question. It's one that a lot of people get wrong because they think management is a promotion instead of a career shift. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Okay. That's good. That's good. That's a good start. It is quite different than what people think from the outside usually. The core truth isn't this is the aha, whatever the hell that means. You don't get into management by being the best doer. Yeah, that's true. You get into management by proving you can multiply other people. Well, that's a very general rule, but I would agree with that in a general sense, but there's a lot of specific examples where that doesn't apply. Most people wait to be picked. Managers get pulled in because they are already doing the job informally. Yes, this is a big part of things. This is a huge life lesson for hiring in general, like things like the hidden job market. Even if we're talking about worker level jobs, like things like the hidden job market show this. Just standing in line and waiting for someone to notice you often is really not the best approach. Most people get hired, especially in management roles, by targeting that role and actively going above and beyond to do things to get it, right? You go out of your way to network. You go out of your way to learn. You go out of your way to interact with your boss and your boss's boss when you don't have to do any of that stuff. All of that is optional. You know what I mean? So if you're the type of person that thinks, okay, I'll just do what they tell me to do and I'll just do it very well and I'll just wait. Often it doesn't work out like that. So I agree with this. That's definitely true. Now, managers get pulled in because they are already doing the job informally. Possibly. That does apply some of the time. I don't know if it's the general rule. Okay, so let's get into this a bit further here. By the way, there are 25 people here. Thank you for being here. Okay, step one, understand what management actually is. Management is not senior individual contributor, more experienced version of your job, or the person that works the hardest. That's true. Management is setting direction, prioritizing work, removing blockers, making trade-offs, being accountable for outcomes you didn't personally execute. In a general sense, I would say that applies. I mean, not always. In theory, yes. Across the board, that would be the case, but the thing that it hasn't mentioned yet is that if you are in an industry where, you punch a clock, right? Either you're paid by the hour, you're making a wage, or maybe you're in a unionized environment and things are very by the book. Like, I work 8 hours, and at 8 hours, I don't care if I'm in the middle of something, I drop my tools and I walk out the door. It's quitting time, If you're in a very sort of clock punching type environment, that attitude will work against you if you were trying to get promoted into like management, you're trying to get one of these roles, because generally speaking, the nature of management is a little bit different from being a worker. The idea is that you are responsible. Okay? That's the general rule. You are responsible for this operation. And just because the buzzer is gone doesn't mean that, like, okay, I can just wash my hands of this and go home. It's like, no, that's not how it works. If stuff still needs to be done, you are responsible for doing it. They really don't care how much time it takes you to do it. You're responsible for doing it. Now, if you can't do the job, then you're unsuited to this. They'll get somebody else. But this needs to be done. It's part of the job. You're in the position. You do it. Period. That's kind of the attitude. So if you're still stuck in that mentality of like, I make this much per hour, you have to pay me for my time. It's like, no, management works differently. Nobody gives a rat's ass about how long it takes you to do something. The only thing they care about is it done? And if you're not working efficiently, you pay the price for that. If you're not requesting help when you need it, you pay the price for that. If you're not drawing attention to the fact that this is beyond your ability to cover everything, when it's maybe outside of your control, it's not up to you, it's the situation that you've been walked into, and you don't do that, that's on you. So it requires that attitude shift. So that can be a challenge for some people who work in certain roles in certain industries. You have to sort of shed that in order to open up some of these possibilities for you. That's usually how it works. Mickey9 says, thank you, Bill. My work shift starts tomorrow morning, so I'm listening to your stream and falling back to sleep. Good night and have a good afternoon. Well, good night, Mickey9. You need your beauty sleep. You need to be recharged and fresh for the next day. So I don't normally say this, but turn off the stream, get some sleep. That's what you need to do. We do not want you falling asleep at the wheel or anything like that. You're too important. So you can always watch these streams after the fact. Once I'm no longer live, they're still up. And a lot of people watch them kind of in arrears, as it were. So there you go. And thanks for being here. Okay. If your value is still, I personally produce great work, you're not positioned for management yet. Yeah, management, generally speaking, it's about, at least people management, it's about coordinating, influencing, and making sure that a team of people, your direct reports, are doing the right things, that they're supported, that they're, kept on task, that they're kept pulling in the right direction. That's what your job is. It's basically like a fancy version of being a coordinator, right? A lot of people management that's basically how you describe it. It's a coordinator, right? Yes, you're the boss. Yes, you're in charge, but you're there to direct a team, and the team is the entity that does the work, right? The direct work. Your job is simply to make sure that they're working correctly, right? Okay, step 2, start doing manager work before you have the title. Okay, this is now, because I asked, how do you get these types of jobs? How do you move into these roles? That's what it's saying. Now, I don't know if I necessarily agree with this. I mean, sure, this is true some of the time, but would this be like, a recommendation that everybody should follow? I don't know. I don't know about that one. I would say no, at least in most situations that I've seen and been familiar with, that's not necessarily is. Now, I said earlier that networking is very important, spending time with your boss, learning what they do, learning how they think, learning what their job involves, like one level above you, and learning how they do it and what the reasoning is behind everything. That's very important. Now, is that like a part of this? Possibly, doing the manager work before you have the title? I'm not sure, but it's certainly learning about it and showing that you are capable of doing it, And there may be opportunities to say, listen, if you're in a bind, I can do that for you or something like that. That certainly goes a long way. So if you're close to your boss, you see what they do, they may start to confide in you a little bit and explain, this is what I've got to do. This is why I'm asking people to do this. When they're finished doing this, this is the plan that I have. This is going to be the next step. I'm in a bit of a bind here, because of this reason. And, if you're capable of saying, hey, I can take that off your hands if you want me to. It's no problem. And doing it almost like a trial run, showing you I'm capable, I'm here, I'm willing to do it. And then on top of it, if they say, okay, sure, I will, I think I'll offload this onto you just this once. We'll see how it goes, and you deliver the goods on it. You do a great job. That's a great testament that, you're not only willing to do it, you not only understand what to do, but you're also capable, So yeah, if you read this in that sense, then sure. Managers notice people who coordinate work across people, clarify goals, step in. Sure, yeah, that's some default stuff. Concrete examples, I'll take ownership of this project, loop everyone in. Yeah, just going above and beyond sometimes when it's appropriate, when it will pay off. You see, the problem with this stuff, doing it like it says here, is that then you can be exploited. The manager sees, oh, you're willing to do more than your job. So rather than have you do it in good faith, I'm going to exploit you. I'm going to say, I got a good thing going here. This person is willing to, offload some of my job. So I'm going to take full advantage of that, but I'm not going to do it in a reasonable way. It's going to become normalized. It's going to become my expectation. So now I just expect you to do that for me. And if you don't do it for me, now all of a sudden we have a problem, So you got to just be careful about that situation. Okay, let me prioritize these tasks and get back with a plan, blah, blah, blah. Okay, what does it say? Titles usually follow behavior, not the other way around. To a degree. I wouldn't say it usually follows it, but yes, it does happen sometimes. It really depends on how things are done in your industry and in your region or your situation. You know what I mean? Okay, we got some more questions here, I think. Let's check that out. Okay, Lincoln Ward 85 says, "Hi Bill, I'm pivoting to project management post-military retirement. Would those positive be considered management as well, or individual contributor roles? Any suggestions on applying for those jobs?" Well, okay. I suspect you might not have been here at the beginning of the stream. Like project management is different from people management. Projects like that term can mean almost anything, right? First of all, it spans almost every industry. Secondly, it's anything from the most mundane thing that you would do in your home to like things that cost like hundreds of millions of dollars that you're like in charge of. You know what I mean? So all project means it's got a beginning and it has an end. We're gonna wallpaper the room. We're gonna paint the room. That's a project. You know what I mean? It has a beginning and it's an end. You're done. You painted the room. Right? It's over. Right? As opposed to operations where, it's an ongoing thing. Like we're manufacturing products. The manufacturing never stops. We're always manufacturing because that's what we sell. Right? So project management, it can mean a variety of things. It could be anything from a coordinator, right? You're just simply someone that calls people up and says, can you do this? How much money? Oh, okay. Yeah, we'll pay that. Okay. You're hired. Can you do this? Okay. Here's the schedule. Here's everything you need to come in and do this work. Here's the payment. There, it's done. There you go. I was just a project manager. That's something you would do for your house. Oh no, my roof's leaking. It's a project. You're a project manager. You don't do the actual work. You just hire the contractor and you supervise them and direct them and pay them and blah, blah, blah. Right? So it can be that scaled up. And like I have a background in project management. That's kind of how it works for companies. So obviously for project management, you've got the 4 management functions, right? Okay. Planning, organizing, influencing, and controlling. You've got the 4 things. Strong emphasis on planning and even stronger emphasis on organizing, that's kind of project management. That's the real priority. You probably won't have a lot of direct reports, generally speaking. So influencing won't be your primary thing. That's why a lot of introverts tend to move into project management roles because, you don't necessarily need to be like a major influencer type person to be a project manager. Often you need a lot of technical skills because a lot of projects tend to be very technical, more so than operations. Because operations, it could be technical, but it's always the same thing. In project management, the idea is that like you might always be working on new projects and each one is very technical. You have to learn and be familiar with stuff. You don't have an open-ended amount of time to get familiar with what's going on there. So they hire a lot of technical people for that. Any suggestions for applying for these roles? Nothing special out of the ordinary. Just if it's a pure project management role, it might not have any direct reports. It's probably the management role that feels the most like being a worker, So it's not that far from being a worker. So that's why they post a lot of those jobs and they hire project managers that way. Because it's based on qualifications and experience, because it is a management role, the emphasis is still going to be on communication skills. You have to be able to get along with many different types of people, many different types of personalities, many different backgrounds. So showing that off to them, so whether it's in a job interview or whatever other setting, that's going to be very important. They need to get that sense that you're a very, very good communicator. You can communicate with many different types of people, not just people exactly like you, right? So if you're ex-military, I'm sure you're amazing at communicating with ex-military people. You know what I mean? You have a similar culture, similar attitude, Would you do just as well dealing with a bunch of people that were the opposite of that? I don't know what would be the opposite of that. A bunch of free-thinking liberal hippies? I don't know. But would you be able to coordinate well with them just as well? That's kind of a stretch. Great project managers, they have the ability to do that because depending on if they're hiring contractors or working with all kinds of other parties, you never know. You might be dealing with some kind of hippie liberal kind of thing that's maybe a totally different culture than being ex-military, So that's something I would think about, okay? Show that you can pull that stuff off. Hopefully that helps. A very nebulous kind of answer. Krista Rogan says, how do office politics play into the ability to get the management role? I get along with my boss and I'm friendly and respectful to my coworkers and vice versa, but they've been there 4 to 5 years longer. Oh, and then Lincoln says position. Sorry, so that was a correction. Anyway, hopefully that didn't change the whole meaning of your question, Lincoln. Okay, so Krista Rogan, office politics. Here's the deal. There are two different worlds when we talk about management and how to get management jobs and how to stay in that role and how to be perceived as good in that role. There are two different worlds. One is the world of like, are you actually competent at your job? Are you good? Can you do the job well? Right? The other role is, the other world is about perceptions, right? That's usually where you get office politics. Now, depending what industry you're in, depending the size of the organization, and depending on the history of the organization, you get different cultures. That means different standards of how things are done there. What would be appropriate in that organization? What would be inappropriate? What's the normal way of communicating? What's not the normal way of communicating? You know what I mean? That's going to change in every single organization we talk about, right? For example, a large organization that's been around for 150 years, where the business is very mature, meaning that the way you do things now is how they did things 30 years ago, which is expected to be how they will do things in 30 years, right? If that's the type of organization you're in, then it becomes more about perceptions and less about actual competence. Because all you're really doing there is you're maintaining. You're not changing, you're not improving, you're just maintaining. And for people in that environment, maintaining is fine. It's accepted. That's part of the culture, right? In other environments, maintaining is bad. It's not good enough. We're not here to maintain what we have. We're doing very poorly. We need to improve, right? Maybe it's a big organization, but they're in decline, but they've tuned into that and they're really trying to turn the ship around. In that case, they might be clearing the decks of a lot of time-serving managers that, they appear good and they say the right thing, but they're not actually that effective at their role, right? In small companies that have just begun and they're in that growth phase where it's just taking off, maintaining what you have and being perceived as being competent is really not what they're about. They need people that will actually improve things, whether that's the bottom line, like the number one indicator, or not cause major disruption, like drive all your talent away or something like that, right? So it really depends on your environment. When you're talking about a maintenance type role in a large organization, it's been around for a long time, very slow moving, then the office politics stuff really takes over, and it becomes less about what you actually do and how you actually perform, and more about how you're perceived. It's not all just like a conspiracy though, because there are a lot of roles where it's just not easy to separate the performance of them versus the performance of the organization, right? You're one tiny cog in a giant machine. It's very hard to accurately assess the performance of that one cog. You know what I'm saying? You can do it technically or theoretically, but it's so cumbersome and expensive that it doesn't make sense for anybody to do that. So as a result, there are a lot of managers that exist in areas where it's not easy or readily apparent what their performance is, right? They haven't caused a mutiny, and anything short of that is kind of like, oh, they seem to be doing fine, right? That's the perception. We really don't have much of a way of knowing. The only thing we have to go on are things like complaints against them. And that's where things like office politics come, like what you're calling office politics, come into play. It's about like power perception, right? So instead, what people will do in that situation is they won't actually care about their department performing. Their number one priority instead will be, I need to minimize complaints. How can I minimize complaints? Well, one way would be to actually do a great job, but another way would be to threaten anybody that might complain about me and have the dirt on them, so that, if they complain about me, it's going to be very damaging for them. So as a result, I look like a genius. I look like I'm doing an amazing job because nobody's complaining about me. And business seems to be running as usual, so I look like a hero, when in reality, I'm actually quite toxic and I'm quite incompetent, right? But I am quite attuned to surviving in my current position. So you do get a lot of mixed incentives and stuff like that. As a CEO, for example, it was partly my job to ensure that incentives weren't stacked up to encourage that type of behavior. You play with a lot of incentives and try and architect the incentives so that people don't find themselves in those situations where there's like a conflict. What's good for them is not good for the organization. You try and align those, right? But your question, now that we've set this up, I've set this up in a very long-winded way. You get along with your boss, you're friendly and respect your coworkers, they've been there longer. How do office politics play in the ability to get a management role? So in those types of environment, it dominates it. Let's say I'm moving up, okay? And I'm your boss, and I'm getting a promotion. Someone now has to take my original job that I've left vacant. There's now a vacancy there. So one of my responsibilities might be to ensure that, I've ensured that there's a good succession and that there's someone in place doing my old job that's going to do a good job and that's going to maintain the stability and continuity. So I have to pick somebody. The obvious choice would be to pick one of my direct reports, one of my best people that I know really well, and they have the capacity to do this, and say, do you want to move up? That kind of thing. But those decisions are also heavily influenced by, are they going to make me look good, right? Because my number one priority is to myself. So I do not want someone to come in behind me and then instantly my old department is performing 3 times as well as it did under me. That would make me look bad. Maybe I know that they pay attention to that kind of stuff, the people above me. So they would be able to notice that if it happened. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I don't look bad by putting somebody of moderate competence in place to replace it. Things like that. There's all kinds of weird incentives that you have to think through and hedge against. That's the thing. So when people say power politics, they're usually referring to that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's a huge part, but only in those specific environments, not across the board. If you work in a upcoming tech startup, for example, they don't care if you drive away a lot of employees as long as you accomplish your goals, like the goals that were stated. They don't care if you defy convention. They don't care if you put people twice your age to shame, or vice versa. They only care about results, and sometimes they care about that to the expense of things they should care about. So it really varies. Anyway, how's that for a long-winded answer? We got 35 people here. Thank you for being here. If you want to go deeper with me, check out this course, my $100 MBA course, all my advice in one place. And this is basically a replication of a university 2-year Master's of Business Administration program. So it's a course, but it's really a program. It's a series of courses. And what you get from me is you get a reading list with, all the books on it. These are books that are used the world over in some of the most prestigious MBA programs around the world, including places like Harvard Business School. So you're getting the same textbook that they're using in Harvard Business School for the various classes. And you read it on your own. That's the idea. You could do it at your leisure. You could do it on your own schedule. You could do it, to the depth that you're interested in. Some people just want to skim it. Other people want to go in depth. And then I give you videos that sort of guide you through. I give you 2 things. I give you an overview of the whole subject, the whole course, what I think are the most important parts, what I think are the less important parts. And then I also give you insights from my career, where I've seen some of these principles applied and how it went and stuff like that. So that's the course in a nutshell. Check it out for $100, not $100,000, $100. Absolute bang for the buck. Link in the description box below if you're interested in that. Ervil Pachodi, if I'm sure that's exactly how you say it, says, on the last live stream, I asked you how to find a job, and today I got 2 job interviews lined up. Good. Is that a coincidence? If it is, that's pretty good. If you're saying that I'm responsible for that, I don't know if I should assume that or not, but that's very flattering if that is what you're saying. Either way, congratulations on the 2 job interviews. Don't mess them up. Do your best. And regardless of how it turns out, if you've done your best, you've prepared for them, and you've done all your due diligence, keep going. Get 2 more. And if you keep doing this, you're going to be on top very soon. Okay, let's return to where we were here. Okay, so I had asked it, how does one move into management type roles? Okay, and we're reacting, seeing if it actually is correct. Okay, step 3, shift how you're seen. This is critical. Yes, that I would agree with that. You must change your reputation from, I'm really good at X to I make things run better. Absolutely. Yeah, if you can work with a lot of people around you, if you can be a positive influence in terms of productivity, in terms of morale, this kind of stuff, you can make things happen. That's very, very good. That is a statement. Now, this assumes that people are watching you, right? People are listening and observing. That's not always the case, but this is a very good thing that would prove your ability. Whether or not someone is tuned into that or not is another matter. Okay, so there's some stuff here. I don't, more delegation. I don't know about that. Maybe that's not possible in most people's jobs, but I don't agree with this. What I would say is more positive interaction with people around you, more collaboration, making people want to work with you, right? The quality of your work is good. When you include people in, working with them, they also tend to do the right things so that you get positive results, right? And then the ability for them to want to do what you say is incredibly valuable too, right? So if you can demonstrate those things, that's really good. If people still come to you only for execution, you're stuck. Yeah, I guess so. If you look at it in a theoretical way, yes. Step 4, learn the skills nobody teaches. Yes, this is a big one. This is why I'm on YouTube, by the way. Most new managers fail because they've never been taught this stuff. You need to be good at prioritization. That's saying no without drama. Absolutely. We're going to come back to that in a moment. Feedback. Yeah, a lot of introverts, this is their weak spot. Giving very blunt, cuttingly rude feedback. That technically they might be correct, but they piss everybody off and then people don't want to work with them. So is that a win? Not really. Expectation setting, what good looks like. Yeah, that's very important. Okay, now it's getting into a bunch of other things. So basic finance. It depends what type of role we're talking about. If you want to be a general manager and up, up into executive management, absolutely, you need to understand finance. You just do. It's the language of business. If you don't understand anything about money or accounting, it really limits you in how far you can go. Stakeholder management, up, down, sideways. Yeah. But once again, that's not universal. This is why MBAs, management courses, and formal leadership training help. What is that, a sentence? Not for prestige, but because they teach how decisions actually get made. Well, management and business courses teach you about business. So definitely some of that applies to being a manager, managing people, or managing projects, right? It doesn't mean that you need to take an MBA to know how to make decisions to do with your particular area. That's not a thing. But it is if you're rising to a certain position and up. Let's just go over here. Okay. Somebody says, thanks for your insights and demonstrations. It is truly inspiring as a young person to learn these lessons early on. Well, good. I'm glad that it's helpful. What would be your advices for young people like me who had the opportunity of early leadership roles and people managing responsibilities in the community health volunteering and college clubs? Okay, I don't know anything about community health volunteering, so that's not my area. And college clubs, that's not really my area too. So I can't speak to those two things specifically, okay? But what I'd say is this. You need to run before you learn how to walk, okay? Now, is it stupid to learn things like communication skills, and how to coordinate projects and this kind of stuff when you're young? Of course not. The more you learn about this stuff and most things, the better, so you should learn it. You shouldn't shy away from it, okay? But what I will say is that you need to walk before you can run. I really think that people should have the experience of being a subordinate, being an employee first before they then try and manage those employees. That's very important because people that go directly from school into a leadership role, and I have some experience at that, you are missing a critical step there. It's hard to manage people effectively when you yourself haven't done anything remotely near what these people are doing. You know what I mean? For a variety of reasons, it's very challenging. Number one, you won't know what's a reasonable request and what isn't because you yourself have never done it. At least if you've done the job yourself, you might have some idea of what might be reasonable, what might be unreasonable, what's achievable and what's not achievable. You know what I mean? So if you've never done it, you have no idea, what is a reasonable request and what isn't. The second thing, the obvious thing, is that if you've never been in the role, it's hard for the people in that role to respect you. You know what I mean? Now, maybe they don't need to respect you to work under you. You could argue that possibly, but it's a big headache if they don't, and it's disadvantageous. And you know what I mean? It's like, imagine if you had a boss that's never done what you do, but they're in charge of you, and they've got great communication skills and they're charismatic and all that, but they have never done your job. Would you respect them? Would you take orders from them? Would you be influenced by them and inspired by them? Probably not. You know what I mean? And then if an employee comes back to them and says, well, that's not a reasonable request, how would you know? Because you've never done it. Do they have a point? Or are they just trying to get out of work? You have no way of knowing. So for young people, I would say get the employee experience in some way, shape, or form. Be a worker. See how it feels. See how your attitude shifts. See all the emergent kind of properties that happen when you're an employee, like all the relationships you have to your boss and to your peers and all this kind of stuff. See all the natural incentives and the workarounds, the way people get out of doing things and the workarounds, they work around having to do things. Experience that for yourself and internalize it. Then, if you want to learn communication skills and leadership skills, stuff like that, you'll be so much better at it because you've been there. You know exactly what these people are experiencing. So if you're trying to help them or guide them, or coordinate them, whatever, it'll all go so much easier. That's what I would say. Does that make sense? So within those two examples that you listed, like community health volunteering and college clubs, if you're kind of the person on the bottom, you're the volunteer that you just do whatever they say, but you're trying to learn leadership roles, leadership skills, where you're influencing. Leadership means influencing. That's what it means. It means that you get people to behave the way you would want them to behave, right? There's many ways of doing that. You can tell them, I need you to do this. Or you could be a shining example of somebody doing that and saying, hey, this is what I'm doing. You can see me doing it. That's kind of what you should be doing too. And then they kind of want to do what you're doing, right? Put it this way, nobody can tell you that's impossible because you're doing it. You know what I'm saying? Leading from the front, all that kind of stuff. So if you want to be in a leadership role, you first have to understand like what the workers do, what the people that you're going to lead, you know? That's very important. Don't think you can just skip that step and say, oh, I'm going to university, you know, so I shouldn't have to do the grunt work that is done by people that maybe don't go to university. They didn't go to university. That's why they have to do it. I don't need to do that. I can jump right to being their boss. It's like, maybe you can in some industries, you can do that, but you're missing a huge, huge part of knowing what you're doing because you don't have the experience. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life. Just do it for a year or a couple of years, and you'll be glad you did. Irville, my close personal friend Irville, also says, there is one company which I really want to join. I have applied from an online job portal. I know I've reviewed application. Okay. Well, once again, Irville, that's just a little outside the scope of what we're talking about here. This is how to get management type jobs. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here. I will be live in just under an hour talking about that kind of stuff. So if you do want to stick around, that's what we're going to get into later this afternoon. Someone says, valuable advices, and I truly relate. Many thanks. You're absolutely welcome, and that was a very intelligent question. So I'm glad you asked that, and hopefully you got something useful. Okay, just as a reminder to everybody, check out that course. We were talking about communication skills. This is my course on communication skills. It's called Write Like a Professional. You can access it in a link that's in the description box under this live stream. And basically what this is everything I learned in my career about communication skills from where I started as a frontline manager, like a supervisor, going all the way up to a CEO. Everything I learned about communication skills, I put into this course. So if you are interested in learning that, check out the course. In the description box below, there's a link not only to the course, but to a video I made about the course. So it explains what it is, what you get, how it works. So it's as transparent as possible. So check those out if you're interested. A lot of value there. And a lot of people have taken it, and I've got some really great reviews. So check that out. Okay, continuing on. So we had asked ChatGPT, how do I get hired in a management role? Because I was just curious to see what it said, and I'm reacting to it. So we're going to continue. So step 5, make the move explicit. Okay, this part is uncomfortable and necessary. At some point, you have to say, I want to move into management. I'd like responsibility for a small team or project. What would I need to demonstrate to be considered? Good managers will test you. Bad ones will dodge the conversation, which tells you something important. Well, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say bad ones will dodge the conversation. I would say people that also people that are uninterested or they don't have a management role to offer may dodge the conversation. Okay, that has been known. Okay, so yeah, I mean, this isn't really a step. This is just like if it's saying you have to go to your boss and explicitly say, I want to do this. Okay, I guess. Yeah, that also depends on what situation you're in. You don't want to jeopardize your current job by saying, well, I'd rather be up here and I want to actively move to being up here. That in some environments, that can be a signal that, oh, you don't want to do your job anymore. This is not good enough for you. Okay, well, we'll have to make some alternative arrangements then. Thanks for letting me know that your heart is no longer in this. You don't want it to backfire like that, so I wouldn't just blindly take this advice. I would consider what you're doing first. It depends on your situation and your boss and the environment and who else is around. Okay, step 6 of this thing. If your company won't promote you, move laterally. This is extremely common. I generally tend to agree with that. That's what I've kind of done a couple times. People often get their first real management role by switching teams, joining a smaller company, taking a team leader, player coach role, managing contractors or interns first. Once you've officially managed people, the door stays open forever. This I agree with. let's say, let's say that you worked in a large organization and you were, for want of an example, let's say you were a technician, okay? Now you're working in like a really well-known large organization. They're known worldwide for doing this kind of work. And the fact that, they hired you is a testament to you. When you put that job experience on your resume, and the employer is immediately recognizable and they're well regarded, that's something definitely in your favor, right? Now, the problem is maybe you want to be a manager. You're a technician, but you want to be a manager. You want to be the manager of the department that you're in. So let's say you're in the, repair department for a certain type of equipment. You want to be managing the repair department for that type of equipment. You feel you could do it. You've been there a number of years. You've observed what your boss does. The problem is that there's just no openings at that organization in the foreseeable future. You're not going to wait 20 years to get that opening when it opens up, or the chance of being the one that's selected to replace your boss when your boss retires. That's not really what you're into. And I speak personally for this. I jumped jobs, I jumped industries because that was the case. So what it's saying here, what ChatGPT is saying here is actually correct. What you can do is you can basically leverage the fact that you're in this very well-regarded company, very big company, in a critical role, and you can say, look, I want to take a step down, as it were. I want to get hired in a smaller company, maybe a much smaller, like, homegrown type operation. But I want to be the manager of the technical repair department, something like that. We're like 1% the size of the company you're leaving. So they're like this multinational corporation. They've got like 100,000 employees. But I'm going to go from that to a company that has 50 employees because they're looking for someone to manage their technical repair department, whatever. So that way, I can get the experience managing the department. I can get the official title managing the department. They'll give me a chance because, I've got this reputation and I'm taking a step down in that regard, but it's a step up in terms of my functional role, So once I have that, let's say I've been there for 2 years, 5 years, something like that, then I can move laterally. I can say, okay, I'm a manager of a technical department. Now I'm going to go upscale. I'm going to work for a much bigger company as the manager of their technical department. So on paper, it looks like a lateral move, but in absolute terms, you're going to a much bigger operation. Instead of supervising 5 people, you're supervising 20 people, something like that. And that's how you can build, right? That is a standard thing. It's right to point that out. So that's the kind of thinking you can do. This thinking even goes all the way down to the entrepreneurship level. So you can work for a startup. They only have a couple of people in that company, right? And you can even make that work sometimes, depending on where you are and what industry you're in. So where did we leave off here? Okay. Krista Rogan says, I'm ambitious in how I can help my company, but it feels like my coworkers don't want to work as hard as me. My boss loves this about me, but I feel a disconnect with my coworkers. It's confusing. So I feel like I'm not influencing them, and I sense resistance from coworkers when I bring up ideas. However, my boss loves my ideas, so I execute them anyway. Is this hurting my chances of? And I guess we'll hear the end of that. That I feel a certain empathy towards that because I've been in that situation before. It's really it's your hands are tied in many ways when you're dealing with your peers. Like, they don't report to you. They don't have to agree with you. They don't have to work with you unless your boss mandates that they have to. You know what I mean? So you have no control over your peers. They might click with you on a personality level or, attitude level, but they also might not. So it's very hit and miss. And depending where you end up, you can feel a bit like a fish out of water. You've got some ideas and you use it to do your job and your boss likes it, but it's just a different approach from what these other people do, and how they think. And you have no control over that. You know what I mean? They don't have to listen to you. You know what I'm saying? Necessarily. So it can be a tough situation. Recognize it for what it is. You're not the boss. If it's the boss saying it, then it becomes a thing. Like it carries a lot more weight. But if you're not the boss, then you rely more on sort of, your ability to influence and all this. Now, depending on the type of person you are and depending on the situation, it might be possible to use this as a sort of practice run to test some influencing ability, right? Learn some techniques to influence people, to see if you can get them to come around to your way of thinking. You can persuade them. It might be a great opportunity to do that. But depending on your situation and who these people are and who you are, don't kill yourself over it. Don't it may be a no-win situation is what I'm trying to say. You have no control over it. So, you know what I'm saying? It hurts my chance of being promoted. Okay, yeah. So what you're saying is that, okay, what's hurting your chances? The fact that your coworkers are not really into your ideas. Well, you see, once again, you have competing things here. Does your boss care more about harmony, and sort of minimizing conflict among this team, like among team members? Or do they care about, an idea that could potentially make the entire team work more efficiently, right? Which one of those takes precedence? They're both priorities. They're both good things. Your particular boss, how did they prioritize these two things? In order to do that, you have to go back to your boss. Now, this may be an opportunity for you to learn, or I'm sure you already know this, but for everyone to see another sort of life lesson, and that is that in a lot of organizations, there are so many things that, like best practices of how they operate and like the culture of how they operate, but they will never say it out loud. They will only signal it, right? So, for example, if you say to your boss, help me understand, what's more important here, safety or completing this project on time? Right? Now, you know what they're going to say. Hands down, always, they're going to say safety, right? But unfortunately, in a lot of situations, that's not actually what the priority is. And you only realize that based on their signaling, not on what they say, but on what they signal. They say, oh yeah, safety's number one, safety first and all that kind of stuff. But then what you observe is not that. You know what I mean? So in order to know what to do here, Krista, you need to know how your boss prioritizes those two different things. Efficiency through new ways of working or harmony among the team, right? There is no right answer. It just is what this particular boss wants to see. You could try asking them, but more than that, look at what they're signaling through their actions, okay? And then whatever the answer is through those methods, that's presumably what you do if you're interested in maximizing the situation. Does that make sense? Okay, you got a lot of good things going here, but you're up against some of these standard strong forces, so that's how you generally approach it. Guido says, I have a management type role in a startup right now, but the lines blur a lot when we are short on time or a team member screws up. Is that the official lingo for how you describe it? I enjoy it sometimes, but it often feels like twice the work. What do you mean twice the work? Roles, lines blur. Oh, you mean like you have to do the worker role and the management role at the same time? Is that what you're saying? Well, if it's truly a startup, welcome to the world of startups. It tends to be very unstructured. It tends to be like you do what you need to do to get the thing done. If you want predictability and you want clearly defined roles, usually startups are not where you find that. Sure, you probably know that now, but that's the deal. Okay, so that's just the nature of startups. Like, I'm sorry, but that's just the world you're in. It's unstructured. It's very informal. Policies on things are usually not written down or not worked out in advance. It's just like, okay, let's go. It's very informal. Let's get this done. And a lot of times, you just put out fires as you go. That's just how these things go. Very messy. It's only when things become repetitive and predictable that you start formalizing things. Clearly defined roles, very clear compensation for exactly what your role is, stuff like that. And that tends to go away from the nature of business, like you're here to make money, However you do that doesn't matter as long as you make money, And then the only other thing I'd say is you're here to obey the law of the land. However you do, how much lengths you go to achieve that doesn't really matter as long as you achieve that. You know what I'm saying? So beyond that, it's a free-for-all, right? And it can get very messy. And I know what I'm talking about. I've been in entrepreneurship for many, many years too. Crimson says, my interview for product testing engineering role is in a few hours. How do I best convey to management that I'm the right fit with questions? Sorry, Crimson, that's kind of outside of what this live stream is about. We're here talking about kind of getting a role in management. Okay, so sorry about that. I'm going to be live in 40 minutes or less. We're going to talk about that. So come back then if you still want to. You're absolutely welcome, Kristen, or Krista, I should say. I'm glad that that seemed to land. Okay, so let's continue with this. I'd like to finish this off if I could possibly can. Okay, so do we do this? Step 6, if your company will promote you, move laterally. Yes. So we talked about that. Okay, people often get first real management role by switching teams, joining a smaller company. That's true in situations where you have like seniority, like seniority-based stuff, where like, okay, the only way you could be promoted upward in your department is if your boss leaves. And if it's a seniority-based system, maybe your boss has another 20 years to go before they retire. And maybe they're not particularly amazing, so you are not expecting to get promoted anytime before that. You know what I mean? So if you're in that kind of situation, and I've found myself in that situation several times, a lot of young people, they just don't want to wait. I've been here a couple of years. I know my job. I think I'm certainly capable of moving up into this role. I have an interest in doing so, as opposed to maybe a lot of others that don't. But I don't want to stay here for 20 years waiting for that. That's too much to ask. And there's no guarantee that if I wait here 20 years, I will get that. That's the other thing. So you start looking outside. You start looking at what is available, either in the posted market or more usually in the networking, like in the hidden market. And, other opportunities pop up now. So you can move laterally now. You get those jobs by jumping around, right? By not job hopping, because you're not staying like a month or something in each one. You're staying a couple years, but the idea is that that's how you work your way up. That's what I did. Would I recommend it to everyone? Not necessarily. Only in very specific situations, like what I described with the seniority stuff, like where it's like an absolute ceiling where you can't get through it because you have to be a senior person to get it. And the other people around you are all like, they're older than you or whatever. So it's like, it's going to be a long time before you be considered for that. In this system, it's not going by merit. It's going by some arbitrary thing about when you were hired, So in that case, I would encourage people to jump around a bit, right? Especially considering, what happened to previous generations of people starting in the 1970s. Up until the 1970s, a lot of seniority-based systems made sense. Organizations would honor them. They would be around for the long haul, and then they would honor these kinds of commitments. They would take care of employees, kind of like a parental kind of figure. In return, employees would be much more loyal to their organization. They wouldn't jump ship the moment that they were dissatisfied with something. They would stay and have a bit of loyalty. And in return, they were, usually taken care of, right? That's why these organizations gave benefits like retirement benefits, pensions and things, because they expected you to be there for the long haul. Starting in the 1970s, that trust was basically betrayed. So employees were loyal to the company, and then the company hung them out to dry. Our quarterly results are down. Let's let go 10% of our workforce and make up the shortfall, and then our numbers are back up. So that's what they did. And so that trust was broken. So now you have the situation we're in now, where all employees are basically out for themselves. There's no real loyalty to an organization. Certainly large organizations. Small organizations, that still does exist. But large organizations, there's no real loyalty, generally speaking. And, so there's no guarantees that if you are operating in a seniority system that, if you put in your time and you trust that it will work out for you as they say it will, when you get there, they will honor their side of it. There's no guarantee. That's been really demonstrated. If you see what I'm saying, that's been really demonstrated dramatically over the years. Thank you, Crimson. That's very kind. Especially when I trip over the English language and fall flat on my face, as these things often go for me. I'm glad that you have that reaction. So yes, once you've officially managed people, the door stays open forever. Well, no, it doesn't. It depends on people recognizing it. If you've done this in organizations where people have never heard of the company because it's small or something, or you relocated and nobody's heard of your employer because they were a big deal in maybe your hometown, but now you're in a different city, it doesn't work like that necessarily. Okay, the biggest mistake people make, they wait until they're ready. I wouldn't think of it like that, but that's true. You have to be proactive about these things. If you're just expecting to just keep your head down, don't make a fuss, and expect to be called, it's probably not going to happen that way. It may, but the odds is that it isn't, okay? For example, in seniority-based systems, traditionally, it kind of would happen that way, or at least what was going to happen was predictable for you, right? If they had management roles, then you would have first dibs at it, but they didn't always mean that you had a management role to fill. So you had senior people that were kept waiting in junior positions for many, many years before they can move up because there just isn't an opening. The business can turn bad and the company or the organization is no longer expanding. It's now contracting. So the people that put in their time and stayed there for many years, expecting that they would move up later, they then find when it gets to that point, they can't move up because there are no roles opening up. In fact, they're getting rid of some of those senior roles. So that's the flip side of this. It's about trust, and trust comes from already acting like one, like a manager. I wouldn't say that. No. Like act like a manager and you will be one. No, I don't think that's a general rule. Certainly when you're trying to demonstrate your skills, yes, but not like in a kind of general way that this is saying. What I would say instead, maybe an interpretation of this, is that you have to be proactive. You have to go out, do a bunch of optional things, round out your skills, show your capabilities. So you're going above and beyond. You're going out doing optional things, and then doing the networking stuff, like, being seen, being visible by the people that have the power to give you a management position. Okay, so that's what I would say. Okay, and that's just like ending stuff. So we've gone through ChatGPT's sort of default answer to this question. Hopefully that makes sense. Check out my courses. The two big ones for people here are this one here, the $100 MBA, and this one here, Write Like a Professional. That's tacking on above average communication skills. So Very important. Probably the single most important thing for getting a management position. The second most important thing for getting a management position, by the way, across the board, would be financial skills, financial literacy. So understanding accounting, understanding finance, those two things, once you hit a certain level, you must have those. You just must. Because your decisions will be skewed if you don't have that knowledge. And there you go. We've reached the end of the chat. I've reached the end of my presentation. So I'm going to wind this down. Thank you very much for being here. You guys rock. There are 24 people here. Now 21 people here. I do this stream every week, so come back same time next week, and we'll get into it again. Take care of yourselves. I will be live in half an hour for talking about how to get a job for the lower level stuff. So come back if you're interested in that. Other than that, have yourselves a great weekend, and take care. I'll see you soon.